What's the percentage of cussing you can do in your state role versus your personal life?
The closer I get to the end of my career here, it's and depending on the environment, I don't cuss very much in my state career. I have been cussed at a lot.
While we're diving deep on state data and government-specific data challenges in this conversation, Josh is an incredible resource when it comes to generally understanding what it takes to build data infrastructure, nurture data ecosystems, or getting the most out of community and state-level data. So even if you're not in government, if you work in the nonprofit space, if you are a researcher, or you work with data in any capacity, this episode has insight for you. Specifically, there's great nuggets in here about building trusting relationships across agency or organizational lines, building complex data infrastructure and governance, and just generally ways to approach sharing data to get better insights. This is Erin and I's bread and butter, and we could honestly talk about this for hours. So we decided to actually turn this into a two-parter. So in the first half in this episode, you'll hear a lot about who Josh is, what he does at the state of Indiana, what the early days of his role looked like, and what it looks like today. In part 2, you'll hear more about how leaders like Josh and what we're doing here at Asemio are doing to try to take different approaches and bring in different innovative approaches to some age-old problems.
You know, a few of the things that stood out for me about this episode are how important it is to balance the qualitative and the quantitative, that the human story and the scientific perspective is always relevant.
Unsurprisingly, I appreciated his emphasis on the relationships, and I think an interesting takeaway too is the seed, the kind of the starting point, the origin for a lot of what they're doing now with the hub, like over the course of 10 years, started with just a proof of concept. So buckle up and get ready for a data-packed conversation with Josh Martin, Chief Data Officer at the state of Indiana. Tell us a little bit about your role, as a chief data officer. Like, what's your day-to-day? What are the things that you're thinking about all the time?
The chief data officer role wasn't created until 2017 when our agency was officially created in state law. So before that, we were working under executive order, and I worked for a different division of the OMB called the Government Efficiency and Financial Planning Division. So the most oxymoron agency name that you could think of. But that was the performance audit group, the performance management group. And we took all the statutory things that group was required to do, because that was the business side of things. And we brought in the technology and put those together in executive order in 2014. So we were partnering with folks from our central technology department. And then when we created the agency, we added in the data responsibilities and created that chief data officer role, who runs the Management Performance Hub agency, but also has a couple of other duties in state statute around, advising on the best practices for the creation and maintenance of government information, master planning for the state's analytics and transparency. I am the second chief data officer for the state. I was chief of staff before. I'm the only person that's been here for the full ride from the GEFP days to where we're at today. So I've experienced it all. It's been an interesting pathway to get here. I was appointed in 2019, 2020 technically. I was put in interim in December of 2019. So it's great to be, appointed a new agency during COVID. Just trying to figure out, what's the strategy when we're in this time of chaos, and what are the challenges we have to do. So, that was kind of a year of we're just going to take it and muddle through one day at a time, to now looking at it and saying, well, hey, we have these duties and responsibilities. How do we leverage them to be the most effective through policymaking, leveraging things that we can do with agencies because of the way that we're organized and put together. So yeah, it's been a very interesting ride. And early on, when we were just getting going back in like 2014, we got our first BI tool. large investments in technology. We were heavily driven by professional services, outside professional services. We didn't have the talent on staff, so we relied on them a lot to help implement, build the technology, build out our capacities. But over time, my strategy when I was chief of staff is that we need to be able to sustainably grow as an organization to support the things that we're having developed and to eventually be able to stand on our own 2 feet. We can't just be reliant on external folks all the time. We have to have enough folks that are on the payroll that understand things to help manage these projects or manage these vendors and to ask the tough questions. So we've just strategically added lines of business or added different different things that we're going to focus on from a strategy standpoint each budget cycle. So I just have made requests to start a data science team, made a request to have a data science job code put in so that we could leverage that. And I got approval and funding to do that. And that was great. We have people on the team that are starting to build that institutional knowledge that's necessary, because you guys probably have this all the time where you sign up for a project and then you go in and you got to spend 3 to 6 months trying to get all the right people to have the institutional knowledge to be able to download and learn all of those things. Figure out what rocks you got to flip over, figure out where everything's at. That's hard, but having people that are going to be continuously involved and have that knowledge and experience working in messy data environments, understanding assumptions and limitations. The value of that can sometimes be lost.
Turnover is a complicated topic, particularly with government. On one hand, we exist in a system where we all expect a particular level of turnover with our elected and appointed officials as part of the democratic process. At the same time, we also recognize that these instances, especially when it's high levels of turnover and transition, any organization, government or not, is where you lose institutional knowledge. And this happens all the time, especially with data projects. Key players will leave or change, and it throws off the momentum. It affects timelines, group dynamics, and can even influence the goals that a group has initially set. One thing is clear: writing things down and recording institutional knowledge is so important.
There's definite value in people that have been around in government for quite a while and tapping into that knowledge.
Was getting to where you are right now and working with data, was that always something that was interesting that you wanted to pursue? Or like, what drew you to working with the state in the first place? And then if it wasn't the beginning goal, what kind of caught your eye on that?
Yeah, when I was doing my educational pieces, and I had a summer internship at the U.S. Embassy in The Hague. Like I was like, yeah, I want to work for the State Department. I want to be a diplomat. I want to be a foreign service officer, or I want to work in the international realm. My focus so I got a political science and law and society double major from Purdue, and then a minor in forensic science. Yeah, I really want to either become a lawyer, because forensic experts are really expensive. So it's like, well, I can, use my own expertise. I don't have to hire those out. I graduated from undergrad in 2009 with a liberal arts degree. Best time to go out and get a job. Oh, it was horrible. I applied to thousands of jobs. And I mean, we were coming out of the recession and there was just no jobs. So I was actually on spring break taking a grad level class on public policy in the family, and went in to see the professor to ask some questions. And she's like, "What are you doing after this?" I was like, "Well, I've applied to these, a couple law schools. I got into the law school in my hometown, Valparaiso University, which now no longer has a law school." But she said, "Well, why don't you look at this, School of Public and Environmental Affairs down at IU in Bloomington? I think you'd be a good fit for that program." Never heard of it. Did a little searching, looked around, said, "Well, this does sound interesting, and you can do a joint JD and Master of Public Affairs." I applied, and then I got denied, and I was like, "Well, that sucks, but I'm going to reach out to the program director and ask where my application was weak, what to help me figure out, going forward, how I can better, apply to other programs." And we had a very nice conversation. He said, "You just don't have the analytical uh, skills and background on your transcripts. And I said, well, actually, I just tested for credit for Algebra 2, so don't have to really do that or pay for going to that class, and passed to test for that credit. I tutored student athletes for statistics, and this political science class was a statistics class, and this sociology class was a statistics class. So those are things that didn't come out because of the way that things are coded and they list on your transcript, or things that you just haven't included. After we exchanged a couple of emails, I was surprised a couple weeks later to get an acceptance letter in the mail. So I got a denial letter, and then I got an acceptance letter. And just from those emails, he never told me about it at all. He resubmitted for consideration, and I got accepted. So I got waitlisted on the JD program. So I went down and started the MPA, and just really fell in love with the work and the skill building. And I just need to be able to read and understand the law, which I think is the most important thing about law. You shouldn't have to hire a professional to be able to understand it, or else it's not very good law. The layman should be able to go and read the things that are governing their existence. So I didn't go the JD route. Focused on my MPA. I've always been interested in technology, and I've always been interested in data. I was the guy in grad school that wrote all the code for our statistics classes that everybody else used my code. So, I just wanted to do impactful work. When I graduated high school, I wanted to be a firefighter. I was a volunteer firefighter. I got my EMT license. I was going to be a professional firefighter. And then I injured my back, and you can't really lug hose or lift patients with a bad back. So I had to figure out how I can help and serve in a different way, and that was using my brain. When I started at state, and we're trying to do these evaluations of figuring out, how do we do things better? How are we, making sure that the money is getting best bang for buck? How do we negotiate contracts more aggressively? And then we got our first BI tool. So my tooling went from email and Excel spreadsheets to actually being able to connect to data and to explore and wrangle that data in a tool that really shortened the time to analysis.
Just in case you aren't familiar with the term, when Josh says BI tools, he's talking about business intelligence tools, which is a large umbrella term for software that helps to collect, process, analyze, and visualize large amounts of data. Interestingly, the term business intelligence has been around since the mid-1860s, as documented by historian Richard Miller Devens, who referenced the benefits that one banker gained by using information networks to outsmart his competition, though those BI tools were just pen and paper. But IBM researcher Hans-Peter Lunn is really recognized as the father of business intelligence as we think of it today for his theory of a business intelligence system. We're in the 1950s now. And his vision of an automated system that uses information to support decision-making laid some groundwork for the evolution of data-driven decision-making tools, which eventually led to developments in BI and later the integration of machine learning into data analysis.
I was just hooked from there. Like at the art of the possible, the potential for technology and data to really transform government and to provide better citizen services, and to make our state and the world a better place.
And I'm back. Real quick, I just want to make sure you all heard that. The art of the possible. So cool. The art of the possible is a phrase that is often used in politics, business, and other fields to describe the practice of achieving what is feasible or realistic within a given set of constraints or limitations. It emphasizes practicality, flexibility, and compromise rather than idealism or pursuing only the perfect solution. And I think it's just such a great and beautiful way to describe working with data the way that Josh did. And of course, it takes on a slightly different meaning this way. It's still based on this core principle, though, that building relationships and collaborating with folks outside of your bubble is the way to achieve difficult and aspirational goals. Very cool.
It's just amazing how fast things are moving. And when I was in school, I graduated in 2011 from a grad school. We weren't using BI tools. Getting our hands on that and seeing what we can do. Going from what we were doing for performance measures with agencies that were they would log into a portal once a quarter and just type in their number, and we were just trusting that. And then now we had this huge investment in technology, and there was so much more that we could do, so much more that was available to start figuring things out. And then I started looking at the opioid pandemic. It was a huge, huge issue. It was hitting the newspaper all the time. And emailed the superintendent of state police and said, "Hey, Doug, do you have you got any data on opioids, on heroin?" And he's like, "Yeah, get a hold of my forensics lab and where we test the substances, and they can tell you, how much they're getting, give you some data from that." So that discussion started, and I got some data, and I was able to visualize it. The awesome thing about the case system they have there, there's no person level information in it. It's just items, so there's not as much concern about the identifiers and the like. So I was getting a regular data feed from that. Then the question came from the doc from toxicology about, well, why aren't you looking at this and this and this too? And I looked over at the database administrator and I said, is that possible, easy to do? He goes, yeah, I can just give you everything. And that system went back to 1996.
So this is like the precursor to the work that would eventually be coming in then. So this is kind of like the initial proof of concept, couple groups just like in the room going like, what can we do? Right?
And how do we take this data and make it more generally consumable? And I was working with the source data that has, free text entry into what the substance was identified as. And those chemists like to have bad typing skills, or to, there's multiple names for the same type of drug. So some of them will put in is it was ecstasy, or it was MDMA, or it would be four diethyl methamphetamines. And I had to then make that data more consumable, and to make it more understandable, and to add value to that data, because people understand when you say opioid. People don't understand when, well, now they do more now when you would say fentanyl, or when you would say, some of the other things that are out there, but everybody knows what opioids are. Everybody knows what hallucinogenics are.
Well, and like street drugs is like one of the places that you would have like semantic interpretations you would have to harmonize.
Well, I had to create a normalization to make sure that the substance was staying the same across the board, and then using the DEA's like scheduling, create the different categories. Let me tell you, my Google search was so messed up for a while. I'm getting recommendations for drug treatment, or where you can order this stuff online. And we were having an open house for our new space, and the I was sitting there working on looking up some of these substances, and our director of public health, our public health commissioner, walked up behind me and looked, and he goes, "What are you looking at that for?" I was like, "Well, I have all this data that has these different substance names and drug names, and some of them are prescription drugs, and some of them are this. So I got to go and Google them and figure out, what they are, and what the different names are for them, and then figure out what group that they
Clearly,
go into."
clearly, Josh, this was before you guys had a firewall in place.
Oh
But
yeah,
you could have
yeah,
monetized the heck out of that application for college students everywhere. If you do this, then that happens.
right. But we had all this great longitudinal data that nobody had been using, except to like create an annual report, or respond to public records requests. I just took it all and put it into a dashboard, and did that in a meeting with them in a matter of a couple minutes. And the other guys from the state police looked over at the director and said, "And how long does it take you to do what you did?" And he goes, "I don't even want to talk about it." And I said, "Guess what? You never have to do it again, because you guys are going to have this by the time you get back to your office."
You were where at this point?
I was the like deputy director role, so kind of the what predated and ended up becoming the chief staff. But I had a portfolio of agencies that I worked with, so I was still kind of like in the analyst role, what we call now directors of engagement and analytics. What I was called back then was program director, something or other. But I was actually fingers on keyboard and doing the exciting things, and I was like, well, now we kind of have, the supply side. We see where things are moving. We see trends over time. How do we figure out, fill in the rest of the pie? We get all these little pieces of the pie about the problem, because societal problems are so complex. Human level interactions are so complex. But how do you start getting, proxies for things? How do you start understanding, the whole situation across, it's not just a public safety issue, it's also a public health issue, it's also a mental health issue. I saw what the state police were getting back from the DEA. The DEA would send a fillable PDF document for them to go in and aggregate and type their numbers, and then they hit submit, then it goes up to the DEA, and then 6 months later they get a PowerPoint presentation. That's not real-time operational intelligence. And the problem's changing so fast. 6 months, your data's too old. The information's too old. We have new stuff that's coming on. And then we started to experience these other positive externalities that happened from doing some of this work. So as we were seeing these new substances that came in that needed, like carfentanil, that's the elephant tranquilizer stuff that started coming in. And, you see that hit the data the first time, well, we would get that put in the exception report. Well, some of these substances had to be emergency scheduled by our pharmacy board. And that used to take a lot of time for them to figure out, well, what are these substances, for it to become a big enough issue, and then to interact with each other. Uh, we just automated. We just took that. Oh, if we get this, we just kick it over to the pharmacy board, and we're doing that work on behalf of the state police, so we don't have to wait for it to bubble up, and that information could be put in front of the pharmacy board immediately.
So, Josh, that was like 2014, right? And now it's 2024. So, this is like a decade ago, right?
Yeah,
So, your career and where your focus has gone from like the hands on keyboard and this very granularly, you're in it, you're in the meeting and you're creating the dashboard and just showing people, I like that, the art of possible, like of what's possible. So fast forward then 10 years. And like, what does that look like? Who are you? Can you describe a little bit about, the Management Performance Hub and who you're working with?
yeah. Over time, we started to build more of that data and more of that data. So we looked at tackling, issues that had data that would have good reuse value, things that were repurposable, and we build everything to try to be repurposable and not over engineer it to be a specialty, but make it generalizable so that it can be reused over and over again.
Stewardship is one of our core values at Asemio, and it shows up in a number of different ways, such as intentional and efficient use of funds, intentional and respectful use of folks' time, and data stewardship. So, what Josh is talking about with regards to data reuse is right in line with that. Maximizing utility out of what already exists helps use organizations' time and funds wisely. Similarly, another related concept is this idea of open data or public data that's freely available to use. Not all data falls into this category, obviously, as it's not appropriate for everything to be freely available because data is sensitive and there's nuance, which is why it's a great idea to get what you can out of what's publicly available and then explore other approaches like the use of privacy enhancing technologies to gain insights from what needs different levels of protection. And we'll talk more about that later. So, repurposing data for multiple projects makes it possible to combine the same pieces of information over and over in new ways, but not reinvent the wheel. You'll hear Josh talk later in the episode about examples where his department has had great impact and through data reuse. A lot of that is driven by the Indiana Management Performance Hub, which Josh runs in his role as Chief Data Officer for the state of Indiana. Here's how they describe themselves. The Indiana Management Performance Hub, MPH, set out to change the culture of how state agencies work together and how they interact with external partners. MPH combines a collaborative and innovative approach with industry-leading technical innovation to facilitate data-driven decision-making and data-informed policy-making.
I don't know how many times the state has paid a vendor to come in and do data deduplication. The same problem solved multiple times when we could have created a solution once that solves the problem going forward, and not pay for that over and over and over again. So getting rid of those redundancies. But as we built that out, we continued to consume more and more data. So infant mortality was one of the first major projects when we were under executive order. So we started pulling in data from Medicaid, more social determinants type of data. So all of that was just building this data platform now that we have, and now we're consuming data from. I think we're integrating almost 100 sources now, and billions of records.
Like different state sources?
Yeah, so we go out and we work with our state partners. We get access to data. It used to be, it used to be a little different conversation earlier on. It's like they really didn't want you to see behind the walls. They wanted to give you an extract. They wanted to dump a file onto a shared drive. They wanted to do something like that. It's like, "Oh, can you just put a view in your database for me so that we can just get a view?
Just a little peek. I just want to peek at your data.
Just a peek." And there's a lot of resistance on that, and I think the majority of the time, the resistance was because they knew that the data was messy and that there were problems.
Yeah, it's back to the human side.
And they're just embarrassed by it. And those problems weren't any of these folks' fault. They're the ones that are dealing with it because it's the situation they're in. But it's a lot of it is just when some of these systems were put in place, we weren't thinking about the secondary use of data. We have all these legacy systems that have their own challenges. So as we started to have the conversations more and more, it's like we're not gonna point out your all your flaws. This isn't a stick your finger in a mousetrap type of exercise. We know that everybody's got problems. We have problems. How can we collectively make things better? And we'll work with you on those things. And there's going to be a lot of value in having those partnerships. So continue to have those conversations, and you have some wins, and that just continues to grow. And more people want to be involved. So I was the guy that started the drug work back in 2014. I have an entire team that works on it now and supports the drug commissioner, the drug czar. Yeah, I co-chaired the data subcommittee for the Commission to Combat Drug Abuse. Presented to them, early on, uh, some of the data dashboards, and there was a senator at the time that was on that board, and as I finished, wrapping up, showing that the proliferation of cocaine and then the decline of cocaine, the proliferation of opioids and how they move over space and time, and where they're likely coming from. And as I finished up, he goes, "This is exactly what we need to be doing." So the lights are starting to come
But
on.
he meant data, not cocaine or opioids, right?
Data.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, yeah, not opioids. We need data. Like, and there has been a faction of legislators that have been clamoring and asking for data for years, and not getting good response from agencies.
Do you think governance has anything to do with it? Because if you're not working in this space, and even if you don't have a lot of familiarity working at a state level, interagency data sharing isn't so simple, right? It's not just within the state boundaries. There are data sharing agreements that are required, legislation that prohibits that. I mean, you're still subject to federal regulations. So that can be a challenge that even if you have folks that, want to share data, they may not be able to. And so like, can you talk about, has any of the work that you've done, do you think that it's impacted or maybe accelerated some conversations about how can we work within governance constraints? Like talk a little bit about that, Josh.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point there, federal regulations, and it's a spaghetti bowl. So one of the early hires was an attorney, and we were actually sharing a cube because we were growing as an organization, didn't have enough of seats. So, and he's now the chief privacy officer for the state, but we needed somebody that could come in and have those legal conversations, that understood the state landscape, that understood the federal regs, or at least could go and start figuring some of these things out because they're different. HIPAA, FERPA, CJIS, Pub 1075, they all have their different requirements because they were all done in silos. So there wasn't any consistency across the board or normalization across all the federal agencies. And there's a lot of times it wasn't clear. 42 CFR Part 2, which predates HIPAA, is specific to mental health, and there's a lot of limitations, things you can and can't do, and that's probably the hardest regulation to work with. CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Systems, from the FBI, Department of Justice, their guidance on it says metadata. They consider metadata the same from a protection standpoint as all their data, so it falls under the same regulations. Well, there's very restricted use possibilities within the criminal justice information systems uh, framework. And the state police get CJIS audits. And if there's a finding, they lose the ability to connect to some of the most important federal systems like APHIS. You've had a security finding, a CJIS violation, we cut off your access. So there's a big stick if something happens. So there's a lot of risk avoidance, risk aversion. And it took us 2 years, both wanting and working together with the state police. They wanted to give us data, but they knew that there was a lot of challenges around us, and us working with them 2 years to navigate that and figure out, how are we going to handle this criminal history information in our environment so we can use it and make it more available. And we got there finally. But yeah, navigating all those things is tough. It's really hard. And the real key is to figure out a data sharing agreement like we have. We have one that has all of the regulatory stuff in there from all of the different agencies. It's all listed because that's what the attorneys want. They want to see that these things are all listed in the sharing agreement that has been signed. So we just include all of those, and with executive branch agencies, we sign it once. We don't have to do them every single time. We do the legal stuff once, and then when we start doing the data work, it becomes a business use case driven. It's a charter.
And that was legislated, right?
Yeah.
Because that's hard to copy without it being encoded in policy like that. Yeah.
The senator that carried our legislation was the right person at the time to put to be the author and to make sure that got passed. We had some challenges on that. There was so much opposition because there was not a lot of understanding, and all the political stuff that's going on. And now we're talking funding. So I got drugged to some meetings with the budget people from both the House and the Senate. And one of our senators at the time, Luke Kenley, it was just the guy. He knew all the funding stuff. He had been in the General Assembly for a long time. Like he knew all the funding stuff, and he had a reputation for being a little difficult to deal with. And I remember very, very clearly being in that discussion as we were asking for $10 million a year in general fund appropriations. Him saying, I don't understand this well, but I know it's important. So we can support these things. So, and then over on the House side, Chairman Brown, Doc Brown was asking, well, what's going to be the next ask? Are we going to be spending all of this on this technology all the time? It's like, no, we buy it once and we get to use it for a long time. We're gonna focus on sustainability and generating the maximum value out of this. So I'm not going to come to you to buy new technology and have failed technology projects every 2 years for the budget. We're gonna be very fiscally responsible, and we're gonna build and sustain things.
But can I just pause here to call out how cool a name Doc Brown is? Like Doc Brown is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, and those guys between Luke Kenley and Doc Brown, I mean, they knew all of the stuff when it came to budgeting, and they both retired right about the same time. So we had a whole changeover in fiscal leadership in the General Assembly, which that's hard. That's tough. You've got these people, that are the experts in that specific space, and then you lose that.
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
The best piece that I've ever received? Oh, probably the best thing, as I've been through this now for over 12 years, is you got to celebrate your wins. You can really get lost because of the type of work, and you can really get heads down, and then you start running into all these frustrating roadblocks, and you feel like you're banging your head against the wall. But I mean, if you take time to take a breath and look back and see how far you've come, you're usually a lot farther along, and you've accomplished a ton along that way. Well, it doesn't feel like it because you're still running into all of these different challenges. Taking time to celebrate the wins that you've gotten is, I think, really important.
I love that. Yeah.
I love that too. That's awesome.
This work is really hard, and it takes a lot of time. You're not going to change things in the time that you think you might be able to. So just be prepared to grind it out, and try to build your support team. Make everybody that you're working with from these different agencies part of your team. Get to know them well. After you work with somebody numerous times over the course of years, and that bond and that trust gets built, and it really lowers the barrier to entry on some of these things. And then they come to you and they say, hey, we have this issue. We'd like to talk to you about it, before we go and try to find a solution, and maybe you have a solution for us. So, making sure that you're getting everybody on the team, and focusing on collaboration rather than going in and saying, thou shalt do this and I have the statutory authority. You make a lot more friends when you're not swinging the hammer and you're offering incentives rather than going in and laying down the law.
Over 10 years ago, when we were first starting out in this space, I was in a meeting with a school system, and there was the head of an early childhood center in the room who happened to also be the partner of a great philanthropist. So this individual had multiple perspectives on this work. And after the meeting, it was about integrated data. He came over to me and he was like, he just kind of patted me on the shoulder. And this is, again, I'm like a year, 2 years in to this work coming from the private sector. He's like, hang in there. This is a long game. And I was like, okay, thanks. And now over 10 years later, I know exactly what he was talking about. So that is great advice, Josh. It's like, you better have tenacity, grit, be collaborative, work on those relationships. There's no quick and easy wins here. So great advice.
Yeah, data is a team sport.
Okay, we're going to pause there for now. Be sure to tune in to part 2 soon to hear Josh and Aaron dig a little deeper on how the 2020 pandemic changed our relationship with data, the progress we need to make on funding and who gets access to it, and the innovative technologies that are helping Indiana and community organizations across the country reach deeper insights faster. Thanks for listening.